Yeah, so I've been reading up on metaphysics and I definitely need a break. So I'm studying ontology right now, and I ran into this argument from a guy named Alvin Plantinga. And Alvin Plantinga has a modal ontological argument that allegedly proves God. And so I read up on this argument and I just had to say something about it. So this is the modal ontological argument. Alvin Plantinga uses modal logic to argue for the existence of God. And the argument goes something like this. Premise 1. It is possible that a maximally great being, God, exists. Premise 2. If it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being exists in some possible world. Premise 3. If a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then it exists in every possible world, because a maximally great being would have necessary existence. Premise 4. If a maximally great being exists in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world. And the conclusion. Therefore, a maximally great being exists in the actual world. So I read up on the argument, I did some research, I watched some videos, and I've got a few problems with the argument. Problem number 1. Premise 2 assumes that possible worlds exist. This assumption is pretty important. It's the foundation for the argument's logical structure. However, we don't know if possible worlds actually exist. Theoretical worlds are a construct within modal logic, but there's not actually any evidence that they exist. Basing an argument on an unverified assumption of these worlds is unsound. Even if possible worlds exist, we can't possibly understand their nature or the laws that govern them. Which brings me to problem number 2. Premise 2 assumes that our logical laws are applicable to other possible worlds. Modal logic deals with possibility and necessity, holding the assumption that logical laws hold true in all possible worlds. But how do we measure that? For example, we can know that logical laws apply to our world. Look no further than the law of identity. We know for certain that an entity is identical to itself, and that it can be no other way. However, we don't know that to be the case in other possible worlds. If other worlds do exist, they might operate under different fundamental principles that we can't comprehend from within our own universe. This is a problem for our conceptual frameworks, since logic is embedded into human cognition. We can't imagine a world without logic, and so we presume the things we talk about to be logical. But when we get into the territory of other universes, it's possibly limitless. And the thing is, logic doesn't work well with infinite or limitless. Problem number 3. We can't understand maximally great beings. The first premise actually presupposes that we understand what a maximally great being is. The truth is that a maximally great being, or infinitely great being, is incoherent. The reason for this is that logic is limited, and anything infinite becomes incoherent and outside the realm of the human mind. We don't really understand the nature of an infinite being, and if an infinite being did exist, how can we know that it would reveal itself in a limited possible world? Problem number 4. Premise 3 asserts that if a maximally great being exists in some possible world, it exists in every possible world due to its necessary existence. This assumes a lot about God. Specifically that God is a necessary being. But that's a problem. The thing is, we don't know a whole lot about God from a philosophical standard. David Hume had plenty of criticisms about what we actually know of God. If God did create the universe, we only know that God is powerful enough to do so. We don't know the full extent of God's attributes. We can't know if God is physical, if there are multiple gods, or if God possesses the property of necessary existence. This premise assumes God's nature without empirical evidence or a priori certainty, and using the Bible to define God's nature is insufficient for establishing an a priori claim. Now, if premises 2 and 3 were accepted, there wouldn't be any problems for premises 4 and 5. But premises 2 and 3 aren't valid, so the whole argument falls apart. I know there are other arguments out there, but mine are the biggest gaps I found within the argument. As it stands, I can't take the ontological argument seriously until these issues are cleared up. So let me know if you have any of the answers to any of my questions in the comments. Bye.